Hello, YouTube. Good morning. I will be doing the update today. Don't mind the little hair here. We're still in quarantine here in Toronto. And let's go ahead and get started with today's update. What are we expecting to see today? So we've got some earnings that continue to come out. Walmart, Home Depot, and Advanced Auto Parts. We've also got Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Fed Chair Powell testifying remotely today before the Senate committee. It's also the second day of the WHO's assembly, so it's all held virtually, the World Health Organization's assembly, and we will keep an eye out on that. So the latest news on coronavirus stuff. Confirmed infections in the US top 1.5 millions, while we exceed about 90,000 deaths. The New York mayor actually said that the city will meet all the thresholds set by the state to reopen in the first half of June, so they are continuously pressing to reopen, even in the most hit state. So U.S. health regulators released guidelines for reopening nursing homes. Italy allowed restaurants, cafes, clothing retailers, hairdressers, and museums to reopen, while South Korean health officials found that a group of patients who tested positive a second time for the virus has passed the disease on to others. In terms of market news in futures, we actually moved a decent amount higher, and that happened overnight and into yesterday's close, while we actually dropped off quite a bit coming into this market open here just half an hour before. This is following the best day of Wall Street in 6 weeks, as the Dow jumped more than 900 points and the S&P closed up 3.2%. So stocks began to climb as the Fed gave monetary assurance, but really picked up after Moderna, the vaccine conglomerate, as we call it now, said early human tests of coronavirus vaccine yielded positive results. So parts of the US and Europe also eased lockdown further, including some of the hardest hit states. So some investors are taking money off the table after yesterday's rally. That's why we saw a slight sell-off here into the morning, and in European stocks as well. So overnight, Asia Pacific Index and Japan's Topix Index both posted gains as they caught up to the US moves. In Europe this morning, though, the Stoxx 600 index was up 0.7% lower by about 5:50 a.m., 6 a.m. Eastern Time. In the wake of yesterday's 4% surge, the S&P 500 futures actually pointed lower to the open, and the 10-year Treasury yield was about 0.708%. So today is contract expiry for West Texas Intermediate, and there is no sign of a repeat of last month's crazy session. So remember that we actually dropped into negative $37 last time, and with barrels for June delivery closing at about $32, we don't expect it to drop into negative territory or as crazy as we saw last time around. Now, Fed Chair Powell and Treasurer and Secretary Treasury Mnuchin are set to appear via video conference before the Senate Banking Committee this morning to discuss $500 billion in emergency lending programs. To add to that, we have a lot of companies that are posting a lot of news that we might find interesting throughout this pandemic. So Uber Technologies actually is cutting several thousand additional jobs, closing more than 36 offices and reevaluating big bets in areas ranging from freight to self-driving technologies. So the decision to lay off about 3,000 people, that means that Uber is cutting about a quarter of its workforce in under a month to save $1 billion in fixed costs. Now, the company's drivers aren't classified as employees, so they are not included. In terms of other news, SoftBank, Japanese conglomerate, plans to seek buyers for about $20 billion of its shares of T-Mobile. So U.S. banks, including Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, are working to round up investors for what would be the largest stock trade in market history. Now, SoftBank owns about a quarter of T-Mobile after its U.S. cell phone giants merged with SoftBank-controlled Sprint. So a 44% stake in owned T-Mobile parent Deutsche Telekom. SoftBank has said that it plans to sell up to $41 billion in assets to prop up its struggling portfolio and in order to buy back some of its own shares. So we may see airlines start pressing out of what is this pandemic and actually start reopening and actually reformulating routes and services and balancing safety protocols with challenges to persuade people to come on board after this pandemic. It's going to be a very interesting time because who knows how many people are actually going to fly, even given the option. I doubt we'll see the same surge of flights as we did before the pandemic, going on vacation, whatever it may be. But airlines are trying to seduce people to actually start coming aboard and start flying around by some route changes and service changes to increase safety. So airports and carriers are rolling out temperature checks, thermal scans, and passengers on Europe's biggest budget, excuse me, biggest budget airline must raise their hand to use the toilet. So many carriers are actually removing in-flight magazines, um, eliminating meals on shorter routes, and parking the duty-free cart. So in other European news and flight news, if we're going to continue across borders, the agreement between German Chancellor Merkel and French President Emmanuel Macron have reached a potential agreement for 500 billion euro or 546 billion dollars aid package for the European Union. It was widely welcomed by everyone from Italian bondholders to the Spanish Prime Minister and also Christine Lagarde from the ECB. Now, the agreement of all European Union member states is needed to it is needed for the measure to progress. So, with some, including Austria, already expressing resistance. So, we'll see how this goes. We've got two $500 billion deals that will be talked about this week, one today in the US as an aid package, and then, of course, in Europe. Now, in terms of stock news, futures news, market news, we've got a slight dip here in the US S&P 500 futures as we nearly hit that 3,000 level. We just came shy of it, hitting the 2980s. And from there, we actually dropped off into what is potentially the market open. So a key level for you guys is the 2924s. We're going to see that's going to be a pivotal flip zone for the longs and shorts. We might see a sell-off into the early morning and then see how it holds out above these 50s. We could see a lot of buy pressure. Now, we don't know which way it's going to go. We don't know if we're selling the early morning rallies or we're buying this thing. But what I know is 2924 is a huge flip zone for buyers and sellers. Now, having said that, guys, I will leave you off with that, and I hope everyone has a great morning. Let's see some of these YouTube questions, if anything. Nothing there, and a shorter YouTube update today, and we're going to get ready for this market. So I hope everyone's safe and everyone's ready to trade the rest of this week as we see a lot of equity upside on a lot of talk of continued stimulus. So I hope everyone has a great day, and we will jump in our trading room with our trade pros to get this thing rolling. Bye, everyone.